Yeah, that's a very loaded question. I feel like we could do a whole show just on this particular subject, but I'll try to keep it as brief and concise as possible. So, you sort of said I joined the police when I was 18, pretty much straight from high school. And I worked really hard to sort of obtain the rank of detective. And I worked in lots of different units. I only wore uniform for a couple of years. And then pretty much after that point, I went into more organized crime. I did child sex crimes as a detective. I investigated things like that. So I was spared a lot of the cultural flaws within the police because I think majority of that happens in your LACs, which is your local area commands, like your police stations in uniform. When you branch off into more specialized areas of policing, there are fewer people there. I worked in a unit in the child sex crimes. In my particular unit, there was like 6 detectives. That was it. In the organized crime ones, there was like 20. So you're working in a smaller group of people. It's very niche policing, very covert, very specialized. So I feel very grateful I was spared for a lot of the cultural issues, but there are many cultural issues within the police, and I think the last few years has kind of highlighted to the public many of those flaws, which is a lack of accountability with the police, which is a lack of training, and a lack of critical thinking amongst officers. And the culture that's sort of bred within the police is unfortunately one that ostracizes police officers who can think for themselves and ostracizes police officers who dare question the hierarchy. And yeah, we're sort of seeing the bad end of that over COVID and the sort of pandemic.
Mm. Yeah, I know. I realize by nature, people who join the police are usually very law and order, law abiding, follow the rules type of personality types. But um, yeah, during the COVID, I suppose, protests and stuff, we did see a bit of an ugly side come out. Do
Mm.
you think that was more of a recent development as opposed to when you were working on the force?
Definitely not. It's all by design. Without sounding too much of a conspiracy theorist, the truth of it is they've been recruiting quota over quality for decades. There are many people who would probably be very well suited for the role of law enforcement, who have missed out on the opportunity because they didn't suit the status quo, the current quota. There are so many females who are joining the police at an exponential rate to men, often getting selected before a man purely because of their gender. And, I'm not saying females shouldn't be police officers. I'm obviously one of them. But I'm happy to admit I was probably a quota recruitment. I was a young 18-year-old impressionable girl who probably ticked all of the boxes and I got in. Thank goodness I managed to get in, and I hope that my years of service show that I wasn't the quota. I actually did do a pretty good job. And I think I guess my resume in the police is probably a reflection of that. However, it's definitely not something that's happened over the last few years. It's been by design for quite a while. Unfortunately, I think it's just happened at a far more rapid rate over the recent years as woke politics and culture have kind of infested, our impartial systems like law enforcement. It happens across the board. I know family members who have been trying to get into the fire brigade, into paramedics, into all these things for a really long time, but they're a straight white male and unfortunately haven't been able to get in But if they had have ticked those quota boxes, I'm sure they would have. But yeah, unfortunately, there's going to require a big reformation within these organizations if we're ever going to see change, because it's been happening for a really, really long time. It's just never really been tested to the extent that it has been throughout COVID.
Mm-hmm. Interesting that you mentioned, your age of being young and impressionable and during your early days of joining. I had a friend, I won't say the name, but he was a young man, about early 20s at the time when I first met him. He did end up joining the police force. I met him at uni. We were doing international relations at the time, and he was really sweet personality. Always greeted me with a hug. Very into very deep conversations and reflections, and he was a thinker. And we did keep in touch after he joined, but I did notice he he loved his job, but we're talking to the point of going into work on his days off. He had holiday time and he still went to work. And I understand of being a young man, and you're passionate about your job and things like that. And I remember speaking to him, going, "Well, you have to be careful because you can end up getting a bit of a cult mentality going on if you just go to work and you just have friends that are basically police officers or things like that, and then you'll end up just thinking in a certain way, and that's it." And I remember warning him about that. And then later on, we were talking about other things like politics and stuff like that, and the COVID situation. And it was around the time when the first protests started to happen in Sydney. And I noticed he went straight for the downplaying any real bad police actions, concentrated on the people that did get out of hand. And yeah, I noticed that side of things creeping in. I'm going, well, okay, you arrest the people that got violent or out of hand, but you don't condemn the protesting. And also I noticed other things like we're talking about Trump, and he was like, "Oh, Daniel, there's nothing you can say to me to convince me that he's not a racist." And so I noticed he went from being an open-minded type of thinker and reflecting and contemplating things into more of a, "I've made up my mind, you can't change my thinking." And I noticed since then, we basically lost we lost touch. He used to be, ringing me up and asking me questions about what's happening in the world and things like that. And I've noticed with the recent developments, he instead of expecting a call or talking to him about it, he's kind of went his own way. He kind of went silent. So, looking at that story, do you see that happening a lot now with the younger recruit?
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. I think it isn't just reserved to police officers and
Oh,
those
no, it's
particular
across the board.
organizations.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because I think, it comes down to the old Bible verse where it says, bad company corrupts good morals. And it's a pretty helpful thing to sort of live by, because whoever you're spending your time with, you essentially become like them. You become like the people you hang around. And the way that the cop culture works, and why you can maybe see this more in police culture than other areas, is because it is a really difficult line of work to separate from your personal life, because the way that I sort of saw it is it's like this morality, this camaraderie that you build. It's similar to men who go off to war together. together. They come back and they feel a sense of belonging to one another because they've experienced the same things, they've been through the same things, and there is a sense of feeling that no one else can understand how you're feeling. Like I've seen some of the worst things imaginable. Like there, like people in my life, my family, would just have absolutely no idea the depths of evil that I've had to witness with my own eyes. And it's something that you feel like you don't want to burden people in your home life with, because who wants to hear about month-old babies being murdered by their father? Who wants to hear about some of the sexual acts that people are doing to 2-year-olds? Who wants to hear about junkies injecting their babies on the street with heroin to stop them from crying? Who wants to hear about these heinous crimes? Like, you don't want to burden people that you love and you cherish, that you come home to, with these horrible monstrosities. So you do feel like the only people in your life who understand it are those who have experienced it with you. So there is that bond and there is that camaraderie, and there is a trap that people fall into where their identity becomes their career or their job. And that's another element that plays into policing, because I do feel like there are two types of people who are drawn to law enforcement. One, you've got people who genuinely want to do good, who genuinely have a passion for justice and for, helping and keeping communities safe. And two, you've got people who enjoy the costume of law enforcement. You've got people who enjoy the badge and all the authority that comes with that. And unfortunately, two different extremes, but there's obviously, I would suggest most people who join think that they want to do it for good reasons, but there's increasingly over the years a lot of police officers who are joining in the second option, who just like the badge and the authority. But what happens with that is the identity comes through that career, and because of those two personality types, they're so entwined with that particular job. It's all they can identify themselves through and with. And so the combination of the trauma of what you see, plus the personality types of the people who are probably joining law enforcement, it's kind of a recipe for withdrawing from society and putting all your eggs essentially in one basket. And I think that I was really fortunate in that my father served in a capacity. He wasn't in law enforcement, but he was in emergency services for over 30 years. He still does it today. And he's quite high up in emergency services. So similar type of cultural fractures and restraints. And so when I said that I wanted to join law enforcement, he sat me down and he went through this really thoroughly and said, you have to go to work and come home and leave everything
sorry,
to work.
we're fading out a bit. Can you repeat that, please?
Oh, sorry. I was just saying that I'm not sure what you heard, but my father sat me down when I was young. He sat me down and really sort of put it in me that I needed to go to work and then clock off and come home and leave everything at work. And he actually said to me, do not be friends with the people that you work with. They're your work friends, but as soon as that shift's finished, you keep your childhood friends, you keep your friends from church, keep everything in your life precious and put all your efforts into that. And then he had a friend of his who used to be a police officer, who then went into the area that my dad works, who they kind of had a family intervention. And I came home one day and my dad and his colleague was sitting there, these two men that I respected, and sat me down and spoke to me about how I should behave in the police force and how I needed to really make sure I don't get caught up in the culture. And, you know, I did 12 years. And when I resigned, I didn't have anyone catch up with me. No one's like checking in on me. How you going, Evelyn? How, you know, since you left the police? And I was a bit upset about it because I thought I've given 12 years to this particular organization. I've bled with these people for 12 years. You know, I've had a colleague shot and killed, and I've experienced that with these colleagues, and then I resign and they have nothing to do with me. And I used to get really upset about it, but I'm starting to realize that it's actually exactly how I wanted it to be, which was I go to work, I do my job, I do it well, and I go home and I have my life at home. And I think when I resign, and the fact that I haven't kept in touch really with many police officers is probably testament to the fact that I didn't get caught up in the culture, and that me leaving wasn't really a big deal to these people personally, because you know, I didn't have that kind of bond in that way with them. So I'm grateful as an 18-year-old that my father kind of really shaped the way that I was going to be throughout my career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, funny that you mentioned that, because I remember saying to my friend, make sure you have friends that are not police officers. And I did say to him, remember, you are a person that joined the police. You are not a police officer. Like, it's the other way around. Like you are not your job.
Yeah.
You are a person. But I don't know. I think unfortunately, he may have gone that way.
It's very common. It happened. I saw it all the time. I'll just quickly say this. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but
Yeah.
I had over the years so many people in my personal life reach out to me and say, Evelyn, I'm thinking about joining the police. Can you help me? And the first thing I would say would be, don't do it.
Right.
Don't do it. And these were like Christian men who had wives and children. I said, just don't do it, mate. This is my advice. Don't do it. The culture is just rotten, and there is so much adultery. There is so much corruption within, and I just was so fearful if I wasn't honest with these people I cared about, that they might get trapped in like what you said your friend might be going through. And I saw so many husbands and wives divorce because one of them has gone into the police force and then they change. You see people change. I saw that over the years. I've seen a wife who has children with her husband. He was a police officer. He wasn't. And it was fine. Everything was great. But then she decided to join the police. So that means two parents were now going to be police officers.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole family is now split up and having all these troubles. And I foresaw it. And I said to my friend, I said, I told you, do not do it. And do not let your wife do it. It will ruin your family. And unfortunately, it just does that. And there was one person over the years that I said would be a fantastic police officer, and they're the only person I encouraged to do it. They weren't married, they didn't have children, and they were a person who could critically and independently think and not easily swayed, and they've been fantastic. But I've had dozens of people, and apart from that one, I've said, don't do it. Don't do it. I've had nieces and nephews in my family and, you know, relatives sort of say, I want to be like you, Auntie Evelyn. I want to do this. And I'm like, no, you will never do what Auntie Evelyn has done. No. I joined the 2007 era. So it was bad then, but it's only gotten worse over the years. And I managed to survive because I had a really strong father who kind of led me pretty well in those early years. But I wasn't perfect in those 12 years. I had to take a lot of sacrifices in my personal life. And I would never wish any of that on anyone that I love or care about. So I'll let you go, but it's very common. People join and then they change, and I've seen it so often over the years with so many people, and it's absolutely heartbreaking.
I suppose it's no different from politics or sport or whatever. You get into a certain group or certain culture, you change with it, and then you end up not becoming the same person you were when you started.
Exactly.
Yeah.